Hi, this is Steve Napick here, and we're about to talk about what I consider catastrophic rod repairs. There's nothing worse than an angler's day than to break his beloved surf stick. Today we're going to be talking about repairing a surf rod that I actually built for a friend about 3 years ago. It's a Lamiglas 121M surf rod. He broke this rod literally in half. He got knocked off a rock in Montauk Point, fell down, got hit by a wave, and shattered this rod. The question is, can we repair it? I think we can. It won't be a full 100% rod as it was, nor will it be a 10-footer. It's more likely to be a 9.5-footer with some modifications to the rod itself. But I think it's salvageable rather than turning this rod into a steak for your tomatoes during the summer. So we're going to make the attempt, and I'm going to show you how. Well, the first thing we want to do here is talk about the actual damage to this rod. As you can see, this is graphite. This is a GSB Lamiglas 121M, and it's the full length of this rod is a 10-footer, and I mean the fall was pretty catastrophic. I think what saved part of this rod was this guide. This guide here has underwraps, D-thread underwraps that I put there to cushion the guide, and the rod shattered right up to the edge of that threading. So what I think we might be able to do is to cut, cut this rod until we get some clean graphite. I do have to remove this guide, and that's going to take a little time because I have to take a razor and gently scrape away some of the flux coat here, and then cut the threads out and then remove the guide. On the other side of the rod is obviously splintered pretty badly, and this goes down, I would say, probably, I don't know, at least 4 inches, and I may have to remove about 4 inches of this rod here till I get this to right about here and make a clean cut so I have some good solid graphite rod blank here. And then over here I'm going to have to pretty much do the same after I remove this rod. And then I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially splint the two pieces together by taking an old rod blank that I had that will fit, and I'll thread it through the bottom of the rod, have it come out through here, and I'll thread it back into this piece. And it will be epoxied in fiberglass to give it the backbone strength that it needs to hold the two pieces together. The question is, what do we do with this other choker guide here? It's a 50 millimeter BSVLG Fuji. I may either have to move it or I won't use it at all. So, but I think we can sacrifice it. So let's move on to the next project of removing this guide. And what we got to do here is we got to gently scrape away the flex coat. And I built this rod, so I know I have 3 coats of flex coat on it. And then slightly take a razor blade and cut along the edges of here very carefully, not to go into the blank, and remove this guide. And then remove all the threading around it. And then I have to investigate how much of this blank has shattered. It could be underneath this. I kind of doubt it. I think it kind of stopped here. If that's the case, that's great. And then I'll just make a quick cut along here till I get some clean graphite, and then kind of stent this rod together intravascularly if this was a human being, and then epoxy it and piece it all back together. So let's go to the next phase. Okay, so one of the first things I want to do here is I kind of want to mark the area of this damaged blank here. You can see it still splinters to right about here, and we don't want any of that splintering because it's just going to weaken a lot of this ferrule. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably cut right about here, and in order to keep the rod kind of preserved without damaging it, I'm just going to place a little bit of masking tape here so I don't further damage the blank when I cut. So I'm going to make my cut along this edge here, preserving the rest of the blank but not cutting it, because this is shattered here, and even though this graphite here feels pretty solid, I'm missing some of the outer coating of this, so I want to kind of preserve that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use just a basic hacksaw, a small hacksaw blade. You can use a Dremel, or you can even use a power scroll saw, as long as you're very careful. And you're going to make straight, even cuts along this line here, and you want to make sure that when you cut, that you cut straight and you don't let any of the hanging graphite hang, because you don't want any of the splintering going on. So we're going to cut this rod. Okay, what you want to do is you want to firmly hold down your rod. I have it here in a little block, and just make straight, even cuts along with. Make sure your blade's sharp, and just go right through the graphite. As you cut through, it will go through actually pretty easy. Get toward the end, slow down your cut a little bit so you get all the edges, so it kind of comes off in one easy piece. There we go. And as you can see, we got a pretty flat, smooth edge. And that actually looks pretty good. Now, the next thing we want to do is we really want to remove this guide that's here, in order to see how much of this blank we have to remove. So usually what I do is sometimes it's going to take a while to do this on camera, so I'm not going to show the whole thing. But normally what I do is I'll heat this up with a torch just to soften the flux coat a little bit. I'll make an incision right along the foot of the guide here with a very sharp razor, and on both sides here, and then I can peel away the flux coat with my hands until I get down to the thread, and then eventually, you know, by scraping some of this flux coat off like this, I can take this guide off relatively smoothly. Okay, what we've done here now is that we've removed the guide that was sitting up here, pretty much like this, and it was on under wraps. I used D-thread gold under wraps to protect the blank while the rod sat on it, and I removed all the over wraps as well. We got most of the flux coat epoxy out of here, so it's actually starting to look pretty good. You can still see, you know, a lot of lines from where the thread was, and I had to clean this up. I want to probably use 000 steel wool, just lightly clean this up. But what I'm going to use first now is acetone to break down some of the epoxy and get it off of there. This little trim tab I have over here is pretty much where this blank stopped cracking. So that's where I'm going to make my cut with the hacksaw blade here, and then hopefully I'll get a piece of rod to kind of like fit in between the two rods here, and then I'll join it together with epoxy, and I may move the guide, I may put the guide back. I may either put it over here. So we're only going to lose, looks like we're going to lose about 5 inches or so of rod, maybe 6. But I think it'll be okay, and then we'll go to the next phase. So we're going to clean this down with some acetone, remove some of this old flux coat, and then maybe a little steel wool just to kind of get rid of it. I know I'm going to take the finish of the rod off on it, but that's okay because I'm going to be flux coating or epoxying this whole strip here once I get the my stent in, or my the rod that goes inside it. So next stop. Okay, so we removed some of the flux coat. I used 000 steel wool to kind of smooth it down, to get all the lines of the old threading off, and just a word of, and then I wiped it down with some acetone to kind of soften it up. One thing about acetone, you got to be very careful. Do not, it's highly flammable, so you don't want to be using acetone around a space heater or open flame, or you're going to burn your house down. So our next stop is to put a little piece of tape in between here and this trim tab that still has some flux coat on it, and we're going to make our incision here, and so we'll have two nice clean pieces, so we can join the rods together. Okay, what I've done here is I've actually took that end of the rod and I faced it the other direction because I'm a right-handed person, so I flipped the rod the other way, put the tape. This is the piece that we're going to cut off, again using a hacksaw blade. And using just nothing but straight cuts. You want to get that you want to even up as straight as you possibly can. So we're going to cut this off and then go to the next step. Okay, so now we've cleaned up the each side of the blank. We made relatively straight cuts, so that's fine. And we're going to join these two pieces together. Now this outer diameter is slightly larger than this diameter, so we had to, you know, because we had to cut some of that graphite blank off. But what we're going to do is that we're going to run through the base of the rod and bring out through this side another piece of blanking. So we're going to have I'm going to cut a sacrificial rod that I have. I'm going to run some fiberglass or graphite rodding through the base of the rod, and then have it come out here, and then we're going to fill it in with some fiberglass and then glue that all the way down the blank, probably a good maybe 6 or 7 inches down here, and probably another 4 or 5 inches down here to give this blank the strength that it needs. And then we'll epoxy it, and then I may put the guide back here, or I may just put some heavy duty threading and then epoxy it with not with flux coat, but with 24-hour epoxy, so it gives it the backbone it needs. And I think this rod will suffice. I think it may see another day, may be able to stick a fish with it, but we won't know until we do that. So next step, we're going to measure for a piece of old rod to go through there. Anyhow, just to take a minute here to show you how much actually of that blank we had to remove. We lost almost about 7.5 to 8 inches of the rod. So the rod obviously is not going to be a 10-foot GSB 121M anymore. It's going to be more like a 9-foot 4-inch surf rod, which will still have the same action on the tip. You know, the tip of the rod is still a medium action rod, which will be fine. That's not going to be the issue. It's going to be the issue of the midsection of the rod, where a lot of the power is generated when you make your cast. But just to let you know, we took about 8 inches off this rod. Okay, so what I got here in my hand here, this is a rod blank that I actually got from a rod builder's store, and it's fiberglass. It's probably about 5 feet. It was actually longer at one point, because I have used it to repair other rods, and this is going to be actually perfect to take this and thread it through this side of the rod and then through this side of the rod, maybe using some fiberglass tape filler and some strong 24-hour epoxy, and bring these two pieces together to re-strengthen the rod. Now this fiberglass blank here is solid, so this piece here, you know, is going to be really super strong. It's going to give it the backbone it needs, so this rod won't bust again. Alright, so what I got to do now is I got to figure out how much length of this sacrificial blank that I'm using to put in here into the base of the rod. So normally what I do is I simply just take the blank and I run it through until I get a really snug fit. And that's where I know where I'm going to be cutting this. Okay, I'm going to be cutting it there before I place it inside the base of the rod. And I usually mark that with just a regular piece of wax pencil. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark, I want to make sure this is in snug. I don't want to make it in too tight. I'm actually going to cut in front of this. So I'm just going to mark, that's where I'm going to make my cut. And that will be fed through the base of the blank. And if I have to shore it up a little bit, I can use regular tape that you would use for like spackling, but it's nylon tape. It's a fiberglass tape that'll actually wrap around here if I need to build any of this section up. And the same goes for the other end down here. Okay, we're going to do the same thing we did when we actually cut this blank. We're going to make very straight cuts here along the fiberglass until we cut right through. You got to remember though, just make sure that you pull that blank out before you cut it all the way through, or you're going to get your blank stuck inside the base of the rod. What we've done now is we cut a piece of sacrificial fiberglass rod that we're going to run through the base of the surf rod. So what you got to do is you got to take off your butt cap, remove it, and then take this rod to make sure it fits up right first. You're not going to glue this yet. You want to make sure that it actually fits through here of the rod, and you push it through, and it should come out at the tip, right around here. And you want to make it snug. Once you know you got where you want it, then you're going to slop up this entire thing with strong 24-hour epoxy. And that 24-hour epoxy is going to harden this entire area. And then what we're going to do is then take this piece of the rod and we're going to thread it through the other end. until we join the actual two pieces as such. And then once they're joined together, we'll be able to make a tighter fit. But this rod still has a ways to go, and we're going to continue with the process. Okay, what we've got here now is I actually joined these two pieces of rod together using the sacrificial blank in the center. Now, I have quite a bit of blanking in here that goes all the way down the tube. I don't mind it down at this end, but I don't want a lot of blank down here because it will affect the flexibility of the rod. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pull this out, and I'm going to probably shorten the tip of this to probably only maybe about 5 inches until I get it to the length. So I'm going to cut off probably a good 6-7 inches off the sacrificial blank, and I'll thread in about 5 inches into this section, maybe a little bit more, maybe 6 or 7 inches. And then down here I have to build up a little bit of the rod here with fiberglass tape, because you got to remember the outer diameters between the rod here and the rod here is much larger outer diameter. So I'm going to have to build this up with maybe a couple of turns of spackling fiberglass tape, and then before I glue it all together. Okay, so what I've done here is I've actually marked where I'm going to make my cut. We're going to have about, I'd say 6 inches of the sacrificial guide going in the upper half of the rod, and probably 7 or 8 inches, maybe even more, 9 inches in the butt end of the rod. Okay, so I've made my cut to the sacrificial blank, and it's actually temporarily inserted into the base blank. I marked here approximately, I would say it's about 3.5 inches or 3 inches of the sacrificial blank that has to be built up because the outer diameters are different. So I'm going to wrap this up in just basically spackle tape, which is made out of fiberglass. We're going to wrap it around there really tight, and then I may run it down the edge of the blank down here and slop it up with some really good 24-hour epoxy before we pull this back through. So what we're going to do now is going to take this out of the base of the blank and then build it up with fiberglass tape. Okay, what we've done here is we take the bottom of the sacrificial blank, and then we built up the base of it that goes towards the end of the rod with some fiberglass spackling tape. What we're going to do is then slop this entire area with 2-part epoxy, 24-hour rod epoxy that binds rods together, and going to reinsert this back through the base of the rod. It's going to be a little messy, so my suggestion is that we do just this lower half first before we do the upper half. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to mix 2-part epoxy of equal amounts so we can glue the lower half of the sacrificial blank that we have here. And we're going to just only put up enough glue to get to the outer section of the lower blank. So we're going to put plenty of glue here, and then run it through the base of the blank and pull it out through the top. And then we're going to let it sit 24 hours before we attach the top piece of the rod to the piece. Okay, well, we actually pieced this whole inner blank, all fully epoxied, probably about 5 inches down the blank with some fiberglass tape that we used a little bit earlier that we wrapped around pretty tightly, and fully epoxied. It got really thick. I put it on a rod wrapper for one reason, because as the rod turns, I want to make sure that epoxy, because it's a slow dry epoxy, it's 24-hour epoxy, I want to make sure that it gets fully wrapped inside the body of the lower half of the rod. And then tomorrow what we'll do is then we'll attach the upper half of the rod, and we'll thread it through here with a lot of epoxy and let it sit for 24 hours. Now the key here is you always got to remember the spline of your blank. So always try to get that rod in the same position that it was when you first spline the rod initially. You want it to make sure it's all in the same direction. So this is spline. As well as the front of the rod. So tomorrow we'll take a look at it and we'll see you then. Okay, it's the final morning, and we let this sit overnight, and it looks pretty solid. That epoxy glue fit in here really nice. So what we did is we took some steel wool and we just kind of scuffed up the insert of the blank, the sacrificial blank, and we just took some of the finish off of it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to prepare more epoxy. Again, you want to use 2-part epoxy for building rods, not flex coat. And then you want to completely saturate this with a lot of that epoxy, and then we're going to insert the other part of the rod into here and bring it all the way forward, and then let it sit for another 12 to 24 hours before we move forward. Okay, so we took the fiberglass insert and we slopped it up with a lot of good 24-hour 2-part epoxy. We joined the 2 pieces of rod together. We now have them on the drying motor, and we're going to wait at least 12 hours before we decide if we're going to put a guide on or just leave it as it is. So that basically is the finished repair. Well, as you can see, the rod is repaired now. You can see there's a slight seam here where we join the 2 rods together, the upper half and the lower half. And again, inside the rod body, we have pretty much stented this whole blank here with a sacrificial fiberglass rod through the graphite rod. This thing will be stronger than the original rod. There may be a little bit of resistance when casting, but since it's so far down the blank, I think that this rod will be as good as new. Yet a little short, probably about 9 feet 4-5 inches, as opposed to its original 10-foot length. What we're going to do though is now we're going to make this rod look a little bit pretty. So we're going to kind of eliminate this seam by replacing the guide that we took off, this BS LVG, this Fuji guide, and place it somewhere around here, and then we'll have all D wrapped metallic gold threading. We're going to use D threading because it's stronger, so it will give the outer walls of this blank some strength, which we want to do. So we'll kind of make it look similar to this guide where we have it, and these threads here are D, so they're very strong. And then we'll flex coat it to make it look nice and almost like the rod never broke. So let's go to the next step of putting the guides on. Okay, so now we just finished the rod, putting the guide back on, the 40 guide, even though the rod is a little bit shorter. The total length of the rod now is, it's about 9 feet 5.5 inches. So we lost 6.5, almost 7 inches on this. So what we're going to do now is flex coat it. The rod is finished. The actual joint of the rod, where you can't really see, is covered up by this D thread in here. So this will actually give it a little bit of strength. The outer body will some strength. And we have the cannibalized fiberglass rod that probably extends about 14 inches throughout the inside blank. So that should give it the strength it needs. I think this rod will be suitable for jetty fishing, back bay fishing, and maybe even the open surf. Only time will tell when my buddy Dan gives it a test drive. Okay, let's flex coat. Alright, Steve Napick here. The shattered rod is now been repaired. You can't even tell where this break actually occurred. So the break actually probably occurred around here, this part of the rod. We took off about 7 inches of the blank because it was splintered mostly down the lower shaft, and it was splintered up toward the upper shaft of the rod. Fortunately, the guide that was originally here stopped it from splintering any further. But it was pretty catastrophic rod failure, and we were able to repair it as good as new. The rod is a little bit shorter. It's approximately 9 feet 5.5 inches, but it's still fully functional. And this rod is solid. This rod ain't going anywhere. So we really think that we'll be able to use it and make good use of this rod in the future. So just remember, Lamiglas warranties their blanks for life. For manufacturer's defect, falling off a rock and into the water and stepping on the rod is not covered. So just keep that in mind. But Lamiglas does warranty their blanks for manufacturer's defect. So it can be done, so give it a shot. Then it didn't take a long time, maybe 2.5 hours of labor, maybe 3 tops, not including the flex coating, but it can be done. So good luck to you.